I am reading each sentence, and before that, I told you it's a very complicated chapter. So I'm just resuming slightly. Okay, so earlier we have discussed the illusionism. There is absolutely no doubt that when we go above the mind, the world is seen as simply images and not the reality at all. Just images. And the classical theory in Shankara's philosophy he says is like an image in the mirror. But now a better image will be image on the cinema screen. The cinema screen is a reality, permanent, featureless, infinite, eternal, and the images are falling on the, and we are thinking that the images are right, but they are not, because they can start and they can end. And the image is the basic thing which is real, but it is featureless. It's absolutely not even white. Our cinema screen is white, and also it's got a border, but there are no borders. It stretches laterally to infinite, and up and down also it stretches to infinite, and there is no whiteness also in it, absolutely nothing. So this is the reality. So now Sridhar is saying, if it is so real, the experience of illusionism, let us see what is the cause of this. So he is in this whole chapter, he is examining the cause. So he goes step by step. First he says that there are three things in the process of knowledge. There is the knower, there is the to be known, and there is the connection between the two, which is knowledge. He has used the words perceiver, percept, and perception. So now, where is the problem? Why are we seeing unreality? Let's examine one by one. So first case he takes up the percept. Let us say the percept is real. Okay, like the scientist is insisting, the materialist is insisting. Is there a reality in this? Let us examine. So he starts examining the percept is real, the materialistic formula. So he has to go to science, and science says that matter is really energy, and energy has to be supported by something. So it cannot exist in a void. Now this is slightly difficult to understand, but yesterday I got an image and I'm telling you, it may not be very accurate, but you have to use your imagination, okay? Can a table exist without the wood? It can't. It needs wood to exist, okay? So that's what he's saying, that energy needs something to support it, okay? So he says, now he comes to spiritual experience. So he says that energy is supported if you do. Spiritual experience says that there is consciousness which is supporting the energy. But what about consciousness itself? Is it supported by anything? Then he says you see that it is sat, the subtlest of substance. You need some substance to support it. It can't exist in a void. So you go back to sat, and you have the experience when you have sat that it's a reality. It is real. Okay, at that level you see that the physical world is real, but it is temporary. So he comes to the conclusion, the scientist is right in a sense. The world is not unreal. It is real, but not in the way science sees it. It is the reality there behind the form. The form is real in time and space, and it born and it disappears. But there is a reality which is supporting it. So this is the first conclusion. Then he comes to the next theory. Let us examine whether the world is unreal. Okay. So now if it is unreal, who is seeing it as unreal? Is it the percipient who is seeing it unreal, or is the problem with the knowledge? So this is the problem that he is examining here. So you can see that first see the percipient. Now the percipient can be the universal divine, or it can be the individual. So that's what he discusses. Is it this discussion he's in, and becomes very complicated. If it is the Brahman which is seeing the unreality, but he himself is absolutely real, so he cannot see unreality. So we have to throw that option out. So is it the individual who is seeing? Then that he discusses later on. Okay. So this, up to this point we have come. Then he will examine afterwards, after having exhausted all the possibilities of the percipient himself being seeing the unreality. Then it comes to the problem of knowledge. Is the problem there with knowledge? That's the whole question. Okay. So I start reading each sentence. So you can see how complicated it is now, because it becomes each one goes into two levels. Okay, it goes into if the Brahman is seeing, how can he see? Is it possible? He discusses, and then he goes on to the next step. So I'm reading each sentence now. Keep this in mind that the argumentation is going on. In the classical theory of illusionism, okay, a soul and supreme essence, spiritual existence is accepted as the one reality. So the Mayavada philosophy says there is an absolute reality which is not the world. You have to go outside your mind, and when you see that that's the only reality. The Sat, or if you want, you call it the self, the Atman, or the Brahman. These are all different words. Call it what you want. But that is the reality. The supreme reality is that. And the rest of it is all only images and not real. Okay? So, in the classical theory of illusionism, a soul and supreme spiritual existence is accepted as the one reality. It is by itself. Yes, tell me.
Interrupt you. But in Life Divine, last time Suki has mentioned that it is 460 page. If there is not this dual consciousness, that paragraph we have to go through. We have to read this para. You are reading where? I really don't know.
Okay, maybe you are right. Okay.
The page, and if there is not this dual consciousness, that is the page which we are going through. I mean, we have to read that page.
Okay, so I'll quickly resume what you said. So he is now examining whether the percipient is seeing the unreality. And the percipient can be two. It can be the Brahman and it can also be the individual. So now he is discussing the Brahman. And if it is the Brahman, he is the only reality and therefore he cannot see unreality. So is it possible that Brahman has got two statuses? One status where he is seeing the reality and another status in which he is seeing the unreality. We'll have to examine that. I think you are right. We discussed it. So, Shilpa, as only Brahman, is that way?
No, if there is not this dual consciousness.
Okay, that means even further up. Okay. If there is not this dual consciousness, how far is it? What is the page?
460.
Okay, I've got it. Yeah, I think you are right. We did.
No, we have to read it.
Okay. So
no,
yeah.
Shilpa,
Yes.
even my mark is in that same page which Sumki has written.
460, no?
No, in which Rangada had started.
Oh,
And I still remember we had just started. I remember we had read a small pair.
Okay.
Yes, Asmit.
I was not there last Thursday. So I have written that in the classical theory of illusionism is done. And we had to start on Thursday as only Brahman is real. But I was absent for that class.
Okay. So
maybe what Shilpa is saying, if there is not this dual consciousness, is correct. But I'll be very happy if you go from the illusion para.
Anyway, so I'm resuming the whole thing for you. I'm just making a summary.
Rangada, sorry.
Yeah.
Rangada, I think I was also Thursday. I had to leave early. Now I remember. So probably that's why Mama. So we have to do where Shilpa is correct. And it is there in the note. Rangada, I think you have taken the Wednesday note. That's why that difference came in. Here we have to start from if there is not. We have to start reading from there. You are right, Shilpa. Sorry. I was not there. I think Thursday class I also.
Okay.
Because sometimes I have to leave in between. So that is why. Yeah.
Sanadi has got different. Just like Yasmin also has sometimes surgery. Archanadi has got also duties in the dispensary.
Yeah. Okay. Sometimes I have to go to nursing home, Rangada. That day, then I have to leave because I can't go on the way and all that with
Acha,
It
acha.
becomes, dangerous. That is right.
Okay. So, as I
460, if there is not this, we have to read that now.
okay.
So maybe one
Yes.
of us could read it.
Okay. So to get the context, I'll again remind you that now he is examining who is seeing this unreality. Okay. So is it the Brahman, which is the only existence, the only real existence, or is it the individual? Then he says, let us examine first the Brahman consciousness. So, there are two cases. Brahman, if he is seeing the unreality, it is impossible because the Brahman is the only reality. And how can reality see unreality? Not possible. Therefore, is there another possibility? That possibility is that Brahman is not limited only to his supreme reality. He can reduce his reality and take another stance. Okay, he can see from up, he can see from the middle, he can see from the bottom. So this is the discussion that he is having. So let us see now whether he has a dual consciousness. Okay, that's what he is discussing. It is possible because he has told you earlier that in the classical theory, the reality is absolutely rigid. Okay? But in Srivamda's philosophy, it is not rigid. The Brahman can become omnipotent, but he can also become impotent. And all these things you see when you go to the supramental level. So if you have not gone to the supramental level, you will not know that the Brahman can take a dual stand. In fact, it can take a multiple stand. Okay, that's the whole thing. So this is what he is discussing. Okay, so I'm reading each sentence. Or no, Shilpa, you said that we have to read it, na?
Yes, Rangada, we have to read it.
Okay, then Archanadi, you read it because you may have to go early sometime.
Okay.
You read it.
Yes, Rangada, I'll read it. If there is not this dual consciousness, if Maya is the sole conscious power of Brahman, then one of two things must be true. Either the reality of Maya as a power is that it is a subjective action of Brahman consciousness emerging out of its silence and superconscious immobility and passing through experiences that are real because they are part of the consciousness of Brahman, but unreal because they are not part of its being. Or else Maya is Brahman's power of cosmic imagination, inherent in his eternal being, creating out of nothing names, forms, and happenings that are not in any way real. In that case, Maya would be real, but her works entirely fictitious, pure imaginations. But can we affirm imagination as the sole dynamic or creative power of the eternal? Imagination is a necessity for a partial being with an ignorant consciousness, or it has to supplement its ignorance by imaginations and conjectures. There can be no place for such a movement in the soul consciousness of a soul reality which has no reason to construct unrealities, for it is ever pure and self complete. It is difficult to see what in its own being could impel or induce such a soul existence, complete in its very essence, blissful in its eternity, containing nothing to be manifested, timelessly perfect, to create an unreal time and space and people it to all eternity with an interminable cosmic show of false images and happenings. This solution is logically untenable.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not a very big para. We'll say again carefully. So the argument goes on. So now he is examining whether Brahman, the reality, is seeing unreality, because we cannot deny that at one stage absolutely the experience is absolutely solid. The world is unreal. It's only images. So you have to explain that. So now let us see Brahman, if it is only reality, it cannot see unreality. So that we have to take out. But is it possible that Brahman has got dual consciousness and it is not rigidly one, but it can take different stances? Is there dual possibility? So now he will discuss that later on. Right now he is discussing if there is not this dual consciousness. Okay. So if it is not dual and only one, then how is it seeing the physical reality? It's not possible. Therefore, the blame must come on the knowledge, the third element. Okay. So that is the problem. Okay? He is examining now. Okay, clear? And the knowledge, which is that which is joining the two, is the perception. Okay, we are using different words, but you must know. Now, when he's using the word Maya, it's a power to create forms. Therefore, it's a percept that he is examining. Clear? So, Brahman is the only reality, and it is seeing the physical world as unreal. And it cannot see the physical world as unreal, so we have to try and find some other explanation, because the world is seen as unreal. So then we have to examine the Maya, the power of the divine to create the physical world, and that we have to examine. So there again there are two cases. Is Maya real or is it unreal? So you can see how complicated the arguments become. So this is what we are going to read. So if there is not this dual consciousness, in other words, Brahman has got only one consciousness, which is absolutely real. So if that is true, how can you see the unreality? So we will examine the power of the knowledge, the Maya, the perception, the fault with perception, that let us see. If Maya is the sole conscious power of Brahman, then one or two things must be true. So if Maya again is the truth, is a true thing, then again there are two possibilities. Keep in mind always that the illusion theory is being discussed, and no one can deny that the experience is absolutely real. So how do we see the physical world as unreal? He is examining one by one. Okay? So so Brahman is the reality, and he is the only reality, and he is seeing unreal. So we have to go to Maya and see Maya. Now again there are two cases there. Is Maya real or unreal? Is it possible for Maya to create real forms? In that case, you would not see the unreality. So that you have to take out. So Maya is a power of the divine to create unrealities. So that's what he will examine now. Okay. If there is not this dual consciousness, if Maya is the sole conscious power of Brahman, then one of two things must be true. Number one, either the reality of Maya as a power is there is a subjective action of Brahman consciousness emerging out of its silence and superconscious immobility and passing through experiences that are real because they are part of its consciousness of Brahman, but unreal because they are not part of its being. Or else Maya is Brahman's power of cosmic imagination inherent in its eternal being, creating out of nothing names, forms and happenings that are not in any way real. Okay. So this is slightly complicated, but we will see what he is saying. We'll try and see. Okay. Not easy. Okay. So Brahman is the only reality, and it cannot see unreality of the physical world, but the spiritual experience is there, we have to explain. So therefore, I will now shift my attention to the perception. Is the perception, which is Maya, is it real or is it unreal? That's what is going to examine. So if it is real, then you have a problem, no? Because Brahman is real and his power to create is real. So that you have to, it cannot see the unreality, you have to remove. So you have to now see whether there is two possibilities. There is a power of conception and there is a power of creation. This is what he is discussing. So it's very easy to understand this if we take the case of the poet. Okay? Take the case of the poet. He has the idea of a poem in his mind. Okay? But it is not yet put down on paper. If it is put down on paper, it becomes a reality, right? But if it is in his mind, it is not real, it is conceptive. Okay, so this is what he is discussing. You're following the argument? Okay, it's very interesting, in fact, complicated. Okay. So, Brahman is real, but he can have the power of conception and he can have the power of creating his conception. Okay? He's going into great detail. It's possible, na? When you think of the poet, it's very possible. If it is there in his mind, It is not yet the reality, but it can become the reality. So this is what is examined. So if Brahman consciousness, so either the reality of Maya as a power is that it is subjective action. In other words, it is a imagination. It is not imagination, but it's a conception. The conception is real. Okay? Action of Brahman consciousness emerging out of its silence and superconscious immobility. That which is absolutely without any mobility comes out and starts becoming mobile. It expresses itself in the physical world. And passing through experiences that are real because they are part of the consciousness of Brahman, but unreal because they are not part of its being, or else Maya is Brahman's power of cosmic imagination, inherent in its eternal being, creating out of nothing names, forms and happenings that are not in any way real. So again, if you go back to the poet, I think it helps. Okay. So when the poet has got a imagination for a poem, he has got it conceived in his mind, it is real in his mind, but it's not yet real in the physical world. It has not yet been created. Okay. But there also there are stages. Okay. So he can conceive of it. Okay. Like Sri Aurobindo used to do when he used to answer questions. He used to put down his thought sequences on paper and then compose finally the letter. Okay, he used to do this. I'm not talking of poetry, but I'm talking of Sri Aurobindo answering to letters. There are also stages there. Okay, that's what Sri Aurobindo is discussing. So, first of all, you have a conception in a mind which is absolutely real, but it is still not yet expressed. So, when you are expressing, there are two stages. One is you are putting it down on paper, the points. Point number 1, point number 2, point number 3. It is not in the reality, but it is semi-real. Okay. Then you develop the whole theme and write out the letter on paper. Now it becomes a reality. Right? So this is what Sridhar is discussing. Okay? Either the reality of Maya is a power that is subjective. In other words, not yet objective, it is subjective. In the mind it is real. And it's an action of Brahman consciousness emerging out of its silence and superconscious immobility and passing through experiences that are real, okay, because they are part of the consciousness of Brahman. It is the half notations on the paper, it is not the fully expressed thing, but unreal because they are not part of its being, or else Maya is Brahman's power of cosmic imagination. That's the second possibility that he is discussing. So first possibility, it's a conception, but it is passing through. In other words, you can pass through several stages. First of all, you can put it down on the paper in points. Okay, it is not yet the full reality. Then from there it becomes a reality. That is a possibility. Or there is another possibility that the Brahman is imagining the universe, okay, in his mind. Now he is going to examine the imagination part. Okay, so passing through it, but unreal because then part of his being. Or else Maya is, this other explanation of looking at Maya, is Brahman's power of cosmic imagination inherent in its eternal being, creating out of nothing names, forms and happenings that are not in any way real. Now, let's try and understand this. If I can conceive with imagination things, okay, they are real in my mind, but they are not real in the physical world. That's also very easy to understand, because again the example of Leonardo da Vinci, he had the conception of air travel, okay, heavier than air machines, air travel, but it could not become a reality. So this is the imagination that Sridhar is discussing. So could it be that? Okay, all this is could it be, is it possible? He is discussing in this way. Now he says something very interesting. He says that imagination, let us examine the imagination, okay? Because this imagination, what is the nature of imagination? When do you imagine and when do you not imagine? So I'm going a little beyond to explain more, but the animal has no imagination. Man has got an imagination. Imagination comes into the picture when there is no reality, but you are conceiving of a possibility of a reality. That is imagination. Clear, na? So there is that. But when you go again to the higher level of consciousness, you become the reality itself. Do you need to imagine? There is no imagination there, because for everything, for the divine, everything is real. So imagination is something that belongs to the ignorance, to the level 1 at the human level and at the spiritual level. That is possible. But it's not possible at the highest level, which is Brahman. So imagination, it cannot be, you have to rule that out. Okay. So this is what he is saying one by one. I hope you are following. It's quite a complicated thing. Okay. So because you remember the branching off. One day I hope to do this branching, then it will become very clear. So one by one, we get lost into which branch he is talking about. Okay. So Brahman is unreal because they are not part of his being. So it is possible for the Brahman to create a middle stage of reality and unreality. As I told you, they not jotting down on the paper only of the points. It is not fully real yet. The letter is not fully real yet. It's only half real. Okay, it's a hint. And then finally it becomes a fully developed reality. Okay, so in that case, Maya would be real, but her works entirely fictitious, pure imaginations. This is possible. My example I have given doesn't correspond absolutely, but it does correspond to the fact that there are stages of the creation. Okay, so we can give examples to ourselves also of the so many different things. Okay, for instance, suppose I want to create a car. Okay, so I have a conception of the car. It is real in my mind, but it's not yet the reality. Now, how do I do that? Okay, I have to get steel, I have to get plastic things for the plastic, I have to get rubber for the tires. So I collect all these things. It is already much more real. Then I take all these things and I collect them. It has become more real than my imagination. But the car is not yet created yet. There is a stage. Okay. So finally, when I put all these things together and make it a car, then it becomes a reality. So this is one possibility for the Brahman, imagining and having different stages of creation. This is what he is discussing. So in that case, Maya would be real, but her works entirely fictitious, pure imaginations. But can we affirm imagination as the sole dynamic or creative power of the eternal? Then he is discussing imagination. Imagination is a necessity for a partial being with an ignorant consciousness, for it has to supplement its ignorance by imaginations and conjectures. There can be no place for such a movement in the sole consciousness of a sole reality which has no reason to construct unrealities, for it is ever pure and self-complete. Brahman is the only reality. We started with that. So how can it have imagination? It's not possible. He takes up each case and examining and rejecting. Taking up, rejecting. So imagination is something that's possible for when you are in the ignorance, when you have not been able to, you don't have full knowledge. So imagination completely absent in the animal, very much possible in the human being, but when you go to the supreme level of consciousness, there is no need of imagination because everything is real to you. You are creating everything out of absolute reality, no imagination. So this is what he is discussing. Therefore, he has to throw out the theory of imagination. Okay? So, imagination is a necessity for a partial being with an ignorant consciousness, for it has to supplement its ignorance by imaginations and conjectures. There can be no place for such a movement in the sole consciousness of a sole reality, which has no reason to construct unreality, for it's ever pure and self-complete. It is difficult to see what in its own being could impel or induce such a sole existence, complete in its very existence, blissful in its eternity, containing nothing to be manifested, timelessly perfect, to create an unreal time and space and people it all and people it to all eternity with an indeterminable cosmic show of false images and happenings. This solution is logically untenable. So he is taking up each theory, examining, and coming to the conclusion not possible. So the theory of imagination is out. It cannot be imagination. So then we have to go back to the problem of the dual consciousness and see. Okay, that's what he is to discuss next. Okay, so this is clear, na? And also note the language and people it. So people it is being used as a verb. To people it means to populate it, put human beings or animals or creatures into it. So if imagination is out, okay, so that comes to the end of this paragraph. The other solution, okay, he discussed two solutions. Remember, only imagination or the subjective unreal reality. The power of conception in the mind. Subjective, not objective. Okay. So that's what he's going to discuss now. So we have to read this para. The other solution, the idea of a purely subjective unreal reality. So, shall we start? Yeah, go ahead.
The other solution, the idea of a purely subjective, unreal reality, starts from the distinction made by the mind in physical nature between its subjective and objective experiences. For it is the objective alone of which it is sure as entirely and solidly real. But such a distinction could hardly exist in Brahman consciousness, since here there is either no subject or no object, or Brahman itself is the sole possible subject of his consciousness and the sole possible object. There could be nothing eternally objective to Brahman, since there is nothing else than Brahman. This idea, then, of a subjective action of consciousness creating a world of fictions other than or distorting the sole true object looks like an important imposition on the Brahman by your mind. It imposes on the pure and perfect reality a feature of its own imperfection, not truly attributable to the perception of a supreme being. On the other hand, the distinction between the consciousness and the being of Brahman could not be valid unless Brahman being and Brahman consciousness are two distinct entities, the consciousness imposing its experiences on the pure existence of the being, but unable to touch or affect or penetrate it. Brahman then, whether as the supreme soul self-existence or the self of the self-unreal individual in Maya, would be aware by his true consciousness of the illusion imposed on him and would know them as illusions. Only some energy of Maya nature or something in it would be deluded by its own inventions, or, or else, not being really deluded, still persist in behaving and feeling as if it were deluded. This duality is what happens to our consciousness in the ignorance when it separates itself from the works of nature and is aware within of the self as a sole truth and the rest as not self and not self-real, but has on the surface to act as if the rest too were real. But this solution negates the soul and indivisible pure existence and pure awareness of the Brahman. It creates a dualism within its featureless unity, which is not other in its purport than the dualism of the double principle in the Sankhya view of things, Purusha and Prakriti, soul and nature. These solutions then must be put aside and untenable unless we modify our first view of the reality and concede to its power of manifold status of consciousness or a power of manifold status of existence.
Very interesting para, and we have to again give examples to ourselves to understand what he's saying. Okay, so he has told you that it cannot be imagination. So now he is examining in this para the subjective, okay, the subjective conception of the Brahman. Like as I told you, the case now we are discussing is the poet having the idea of the poem in his mind but not expressing it. Okay, this is what he's discussing. So, for the poet, it's fine that there can be a conception and then a reality on paper. Okay, so that is possible. But is that possible for the Brahman? That's what he is discussing. Then he comes to the conclusion that it is impossible for the Brahman to have that because there is no subject and no object for him. Okay? He is the only reality. Therefore, that solution also has to be rejected. That's what he is saying. So you have to find some other argument for for justifying the theory of seeing the world as an illusion. Okay. So this is what basically he is saying. I'll do one thing. I'll read out the summary. It may help. Okay. So I'm reading out the summary of what he has said here. Just 1 second. Yeah, I've got it. Okay, so right. So now he is saying, since Brahman cannot have imagination, which is a power of the ignorance, okay, let us get back to the first possibility mentioned above in summary 7. Okay, I'm trying to make the chart. Okay, Maya is real subjective power of Brahman emerging out of the status and creating dynamic forms which are ultimately unreal because they are not in the real status of Brahman but exist only in the dynamism. So in other words, we have to go back to the conception that is it possible for him to create a double status, okay? A conception and a creation, real creation. This possibility presupposes an object and a subject as experienced in the physical world, in the physical nature, like the poet. The poet belongs to the ignorance and therefore it is possible for him to create in his mind something which is real. The poem is absolutely real in his own mind, okay? But it is not yet put down on paper and it is not a reality in the physical world. But the possibility is that possibility to be considered for a Brahman who is the only reality. In him, there is no subject and no object, if you remember, because that's the power of identification. You remember, when you are in that higher level, you use the power of identification. There is no Maya, there is no perception, there is absolutely knowledge is not existent because you become, the knower and the known become one. So therefore, the possibility of object and subject is not there. Okay, so that's what he's discussing. This possibility presupposes an object and a subject as experienced in the physical world, in the physical nature. Only the objective is real. True and subjective is not. But in Brahman, there is no object and no subject. Only Brahman alone exists. It appears then that a subjective action of consciousness is creating world fictions for distorting the real objects of the world through the imperfect senses and imposing these images on the Brahman by the limited mind and senses. So, how is it possible that this is happening? Now he goes to very interesting discussion of there is a consciousness and there is a Sat. Okay. So, consciousness is the one that is creating images and throwing it on the substance which is Sat. Okay. So, the mind consciousness is superimposing its own imperfect viewings on the pure, perfect featurelessness of Brahman. Okay, without being able to enter into the Brahman consciousness. Brahman then would be fully conscious of these impositions on himself. Only the energy consciousness of mind would be deluded by its own imperfect creations. This is what happens to man in the ignorance. In the self, man is aware of the reality and the world as not itself. In other words, you have object and subject. So, this is the Sankhya explanation of Purusha and Prakriti. All these solutions we reject as not tenable. So this is what the summary is. So we'll take up this again. Very interesting discussion he is having. He is saying that there can be a consciousness of Brahman and a being of Brahman. Being is a Sat. So there is, it comes back to the cinema. Okay, the Brahman is capable of creating images and casting them on his own subjective substance. Okay, that's the cinema. The Brahman is capable of creating images and throwing them on his own screen. This is what he is discussing. It's a very interesting discussion, and we'll have to look at that carefully. So next time we'll take up this one, that is tomorrow. Okay, he is taking up the other solution, the idea of a purely subjective unreal. No? This is what we have to do tomorrow. Okay, so I make a note because Sunki is not there. I make a note. Page 460. PP 460. Oh, I have to do it here. Sorry. PP 460.
I am quite worried about Sunki. She never misses a class.
Pardon? Pardon?
I am worried about Sunki because she never misses a class.
Yeah. I also was wondering about that. I am really surprised why she is not there today. Yeah, I am also surprised.
I thought she has informed you, so that's why I was cool about it.
Yeah, either she is not well or she has got some very urgent work or her power has failed. But that is very doubtful because Korea is one of the most developed countries and power failure there is almost unheard of. So we don't know. We are in a mystery. Yeah, we wonder what the problem is. We'll have to find out tomorrow. Okay. The others.
Koku.
Okay. So the other. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow and let's hope that Suki comes on the line tomorrow. Au revoir, everybody.
Everyone.
Have a nice day.